Hello, and welcome to Raider HQ After Dark. I'm your host, Raider, and this is going to be part two to the Private DBQ Insufficiency review. And I do apologize for not getting it out to you yesterday and having to substitute my filler video, but family life comes up. So, um, I'd like to start out by saying I'm just a couple of subscribers short of 3,000, but I would like to take note of that. We have a few new Raiders and VSRs, memberships, and that is just outstanding and awesome. You guys are wonderful. I appreciate that more than you know. Um, but yeah, I'm going to be spreading a lot of information out throughout the entire video, so it would kind of behoove you to watch the video throughout. I typically will kind of get my nerves under control when I first start out, and then the video gets better at the end. So, do yourself the service and just kind of try to listen to the end. Also, a channel update. I am getting ready to purchase streaming software to make it a little bit better for actual streaming. So I am planning on streaming by next Saturday. So that would be, survey says, Saturday the 30th. So I'm trying to plan for that right now. So look out for that in the future. But you're here to watch this video. So let's go ahead and dive into the material. So let me share my screen. So, kind of just a general recap is that we were talking about, when you're wanting to submit a private DBQ, how does the VA kind of do its sufficiency review and examination? And if you haven't watched part one, I suggest going and watching part one first. But we're going to start off by this is the actual manual reference 413A1E in assessing sufficiency of DBQs completed by non-providers. So this is the main manual reference that VSRs are going to go to and also raters are going to go to, because there's two separate situations where exam assessment happens. Okay. Or I should say private DBQ sufficiency happens, because when the VSRs have it, they need to make sure, hey, is this sufficient or do I need to get a new examination? Now, I will tell you that VSRs do not have a functional understanding of what is or is not sufficient for an examination for a private DBQ. So this manual reference kind of helps them out, but I'll be honest with you, it doesn't do enough to help them to understand it. So what can happen is, what should happen if they don't understand it, they should get with their rater buddy, who is the rater that's assigned to them, that they can ask questions to, and then have the rater review it. But in the event that the VSR doesn't, that's the first vulnerability where the VSR just kind of makes their own uninformed determination as to whether or not it's substantially complete. So they can kind of project their internal bias about fraud. They can interject their internal bias about how much time the examiner spent with the veteran, and they can kind of erroneously disqualify your DBQ at that point. But let me go into here. So we assess the authenticity of the information reported. Okay, once again, this is more of the rater's domain. So if the VSR is doing this without the rater, that's kind of a no-no. It's hard to track that though, because there won't be any kind of VBMS notes. I put VBMS notes whenever I have these, mostly for the VSR's quality review, to make sure that their quality reviewer, if their claim got pulled for a quality review, to let them know that, hey, look, I made this decision based upon this evidence. I told the VSR to do this. So hopefully, you as the veteran, if you went to your VSO and your DBQ got deemed insufficient, that's one of the things that you should be looking for is VBMS notes, kind of what are they called, bookmarks or annotations on the DBQ itself in your records saying why it was deemed insufficient. Bearing in mind that it should be generally be accepted at face value unless there is reason to doubt or question it. Now, many of you will get wrapped around the axle about this statement. Okay, the statement of it should be taken at face value. Well, reasonable doubt is in the eye of the beholder, and you can't control that. You have no power or control to say this is a judgment call. It's italicized for a reason. It's a judgment call that can be made by the VSR or the rater. If there is doubt, then the generally be accepted goes out the window. So unfortunately, that's a biased situation. Now, the bias should be backed up by a rationale. There has to be some reason why you picked it, and it can't be the fact of over 100 miles away. That is kind of an inference of the potential for fraud, but it is not a clear-cut situation of fraud. And that's the one they're currently using the most often to, state that, to basically toss your private DBQ in the trash. And that is why I always suggest, and I am rambling right now, but that is why I always suggest that when anytime that you submit a VA form, private DBQ, that you submit a VA form 21-4138, statement in support of the claim, and explain to everybody that's going to be looking at this why it's not fraud. Hey, I went to this person because I don't have anyone local, or hey, I went to this person because my VA provider, would not do the DBQ. And you can also say, hey, look, you're going to send me to a provider that's over 100 miles away anyway. So, what's good for the gander should be good for the goose. And just kind of, when you say stuff like that, it doesn't have any guarantee of an outcome, but it kind of humanizes the person. It knocks them out of, you're a number, and I need to get your number across the finish line so I can get my points for the day. It kind of re-engages them to the human element. Be nice. I always suggest be nice, because the moment that you're a jerk, you're losing your audience. So this is going to be a 30-minute video again. All right. Evaluated under the evidentiary principles, and we already talked about these ones earlier in the first video, but determine if a VA examination is still warranted in accordance with, this is going to be, we'll cover these ones later on, but this one is the 1B. Actually, we'll cover all three of these later on. But it's basically like, was it filled out correctly? Did they, did the examiner provide their credentials? It is mostly what we're talking about. Like, this is clerical, check the box type things, and not necessarily based upon the content or the substance of your private DBQ. And then we use the table below to determine what actions must be taken after receiving the DBQ. So the first thing we do is we look for, is there missing information? Are there blank fields? So what this tells you is all of the DBQ has to be filled out, even if it says non-applicable, right? Because you have to look at this like, and I hate to say it like this, pretend like the person on the other end of this claim that's going to receive it is trying to find a reason to disqualify this, okay? If you format your claim submissions in that way, that you are guarding against the worst case scenario, it increases the likelihood of your private DBQ to be accepted and applied. So if they find any missing, then we attempt to contact the certified provider. But this is another thing that I suggested. You should also submit in a document, a separate document, on a VA form 21-4138, statement in support of the claim, that you would like any issues with your private DBQ, you would like them to follow this manual reference right here, but also contact you in addition, so you can clear up any discrepancy between the examiner's thing. And part of the reason why you want to do that is you want them to, hopefully, if they can't get in touch with the examiner, they get in touch with you, so you're made aware of what's wrong with it, okay? What's going to happen is, if they find something wrong with it, and you go to an examination, you'll never find out what they figured out what was wrong with it, unless they tell you. And this is trying to get them to tell you, call me specifically, in addition to doing this step right here, call me. Because Yeah, you get that information and you can use that information to potentially fight on a higher level review. Like, hey, look, they said I was over 100 miles away, or whatever. And that is the dumbest reason to disqualify, a private DBQ, in my opinion. Some of my peers, man, they just, that to them is just like saying, writing fraud across the whole thing. It's weird. I don't know, different strokes for different folks, I guess. Document any successful effort. So we have to document successful efforts, but we also have to document unsuccessful efforts. So this right here, this portion where it says to put in a VBMS note saying the date, the time, the call, this is what I was talking about whenever in the prior video, whenever I was discussing like the process to do a higher level review to make sure whether or not the proper steps were taken in order to disqualify your private DBQ. Because if these steps were not taken, that's grounds for me to talk. When you schedule your informal conference for the higher level review, you can point to this and go, hey, look, I went to my VSO said that none of this action right here was taken. Like, none of this was taken. So that to me says that there was no disqualification. Like, my DBQ should be applied, is where I'm going with this. And that can be a compelling argument to the DRO who is reviewing your higher level review, because their entire job in a higher level review is to determine whether or not all the rules and regulations were applied. And why this matters so much for a private DBQ is it's either a go or no go situation. You're either going to apply it or you're not going to apply it. So if the DRO themselves review your private DBQ and they can't find anything wrong with it, the natural remedy to this situation should be to apply your private DBQ. And to be honest with you, that's all you're wanting to do, I assume. Like, I'm just kind of generalizing this out. But if you're taking issue with the private DBQ not being applied, then the perfect remedy for you is to get it applied. And this is kind of one of the things that, you would do in a higher level review is you're going to be kind of pointing out whenever the rater or the VSR and then subsequently the rater did not follow their own written process. And then was completed by a non-VA provider whose record who records the veteran has requested be considered in connection with the claim VA claim submission. Okay, so what this is saying, and I'm sorry for that little bobble there, but what this is saying is that the private provider who filled out the private DBQ also has records of treatment. So it wasn't just like you sent away for an evidentiary review where you paid somebody to review all your evidence. This is the situation where it's an established provider for you. So the private provider is established, and we're also looking for the release of information form, and also this is the form to tell us who to get the records from. So what this is saying is, hey, look, before you make any determinations, get the records in addition to the DBQ. And the reason why we do that is so that way we can start weighing how probative the DBQ is. Because if the examiner in the private DBQ says something that's directly contrary to what's in the records, your established records, then that's a confliction that must be resolved. And then, yeah, so, and then all conflictions, regardless of private DBQ or VA DBQ, those all have to be sorted out. So that's all this is telling us, is to get the records so we can do a complete review of the DBQ, the private DBQ. Requires additional examination components. Okay, so this is like in a situation where arthritis, let's say like arthritis or like a heart condition where arthritis would need an x-ray in order to prove it, right? So if there's no x-ray on file, this is what this is talking about. Like there's a conditional diagnostic or lab test that is required in order to prove a diagnosis or to prove the severity of symptoms. So like in a respiratory situation, pulmonary function tests must be on file or completed in order for us to not give you just a 0. If we had evidence of a diagnosis and they make a good, like your provider provides, or the person reviewing doing the DBQ, they provide a good medical opinion, then if we don't have that pulmonary function test, we would either ask the examiner to, the private examiner to do those missing tests, or if they can't, then you'd be rated at 0. We couldn't actually apply, the full scope of the DBQ if it's missing some kind of key component. Now, this one right here is very niche depending on the requirements in 38 CFR Part 4. So that's going to be situational based upon the disability that you're applying. If it's like a knee, there's no specific additional test. But if it's like a respiratory or like a heart condition that requires like an echocardiogram to show, then we just kind of need those things. So it's on you, the veteran, if you're doing a DBQ on something that needs an additional, test, you need to be kind of doing your homework on that, okay? Because you're not going to know what you don't know, and you don't want them to throw a hiccup in your private DBQ. So you do have some homework when you're submitting stuff. Endocrine system, heart, rheumatoid, chronic fatigue syndrome type stuff. Like there's a bunch of stuff out there. So just be mindful of this. And then authenticity of DBQs. So this is one where we hopefully are trying to take things at face value, and we're trying to give the benefit of the doubt to the examiner that they're a licensed clinician and they have their own ethics requirements, right? So we try to take them at their word. And then we come down here and we're taking you at your word, and then we go, however. Okay. So here's another one of those situations where the VSR and the rater get the opportunity to start refuting stuff again, which, this is just my personal opinion, but I don't understand why we have so many like regulations, so many M21 references that talk about like, okay, we're supposed to believe the evidence. Okay, now we're going to walk away from that. And we're going to come over here to these 8,000 different references that help us to disqualify your evidence for sometimes no reason. But anyway, I digress. So all DBQs completed by treatment providers are subject to review to ensure the information provided is seemingly authentic. Okay, so the non-medical people. Okay, sorry, I find this humorous, and it's sad, actually, more sad than it is humorous. But seemingly authentic by the non-medical professional, non-professional, I should say, consistent with the evidentiary record. Now I'm fine with this. Like this one right here, I get behind 1,000%. Okay, free of any improper alteration. Sorry, I get behind that 1,000%. Like these two right here are good, but seemingly authentic. Kind of, what does that look like? What? How do you describe that? Like that, and this is where VSRs and raters can go, oh, 100 miles away. Oh, he paid for it. Like they just kind of do this really weird thing where they take one little nugget, one little caveat right here, and then they just start throwing the baby out with the bathwater because of it. So DBQs released for public use inform the provider that, now this is just talking about, this is mostly about private DBQs. This is to make sure that like telling the VSR and the rater what the DBQs actually inform the person that is completing it. The patient is applying for benefits. We want to make sure that everybody knows that the DBQ is an application for benefits. I don't know why that matters, but we need to tell them that. The physician's signature constitutes a certification that the information provided on the form is accurate, complete. Fair enough. Like this is like an ethical, like, hey, look, you need to make sure that what you're saying is true. Now, on a side note, I have heard some grumblings about the OIG wanting, and I don't have anything to certify this yet, but I've just heard grumblings about this. OIG wanting to certify mental health DBQs to have a under penalty of perjury type clause in there. I don't know why they're doing it. I don't know why they're suggesting it. I don't know why they're kicking it around the can around for that. But just because there's very little in terms of objective evidence that can be cited, I think they're trying to ratchet down on mental health providers or looking to. I have no dates or times on that. I just wanted to kind of point it out because this certification, I think they, for at least for mental health, they've talked about wanting to make that more secure, so that way somebody can't just say, yeah, you've got raging schizophrenia without any kind of testing, any kind of like 10 minutes worth of looking. I don't even know if that's a problem per se, but it's just something I heard. And the VA may request medical information, including additional examinations, if necessary, to complete the VA's review of a claimant's application. So, what's happening in this third one is this is us saying, hey, we have reserved the right to make your private DBQ insufficient and request a new claimant's a new examination. Where a review of the DBQ raises questions of authenticity, which I don't, this is vague to the point of ridiculousness, or improper alteration. I mean, I'm fine. Okay, if it shows alteration, fair enough. Determine whether additional development is necessary. This may include validation of results by the treatment provider. So this is where we go back and we kind of talk to the, we call the examiner and say, hey, look, like you said left arm here, but there's right arm on all your tests. Can you clarify that that was a clerical error? Or did you honestly do the wrong arm? So that's kind of what us, going back and just validating things. This is appropriate. This happens all the time. It's often easy to, get the examiner to clarify. And in my experience, personally, I've had it a lot of times where it's like, oh yeah, that's this. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to defer the claim back. Okay. And I'm going to have the VSR wait for you to upload an amended copy of the DBQ to show the clarification. And in the comments section, please write that what you changed and why you changed it. Now that's what I do. I'm going to tell you right now that a lot of my peers, and I'm using a lot very sparingly, don't do that. And I don't know why. Obtain medical records and or a VA examination. Now, the obtaining medical records, that goes back to this statement right here, where the person that filled out your private DBQ is your established provider. So that's kind of a benign, harmless one where it's like, hey, look, we just want to make sure that if you have records for that person, we want to see those records so we can make sure that everything's lining up. That's kind of benign. And then we may get an examination, which if bias has been applied to your DBQ, then they're burning that DBQ. That private DBQ means nothing to them because they have disqualified it. Some people that work in the VSC throughout the nation, they believe that private DBQs are fraud. I mean, if you were to tell them that, they would buzz in and say, yes, they are fraud. Like private DBQs are fraud. I have had arguments, like drag down, kick butt arguments on town halls, not just town halls, but like RVSR all hands, where we all get together and we start talking, like QRT teaches raiders updates and they kind of do trainings with the QRT liaisons. And I've actually gotten into drag down, kick bottom fights about the fact that a private DBQ is not fraudulent. It's not them trying to cheat the system. And the fact that that person has that much bias, to me, says that they need some remedial training. And not just that, but they need to question why they're here. Because if they're looking at fraud, that's someone else's job. That's OIG's job. That's not their job. Okay, sorry, I'm rambling again. I apologize. But anyway, So, I mean, I've fought the good fight for as long as I can, but QRT appears to side with them more than they side with my perspective. But, and this is right here. Like, this is what they're supposed to do. Okay, like, this is what's supposed to happen. They're supposed to take the DBQ at face value, right? They're supposed, if they think that there is some kind of fraud, then they're supposed to contact OIG, or the fraud referral may also be like to do a fraud referral. They're supposed to say, hey, look, I think this is fraudulent. But they're not supposed to take action on it. They're supposed to refer it up the chain. OIG will inspect it. They will review it. Okay? And, claims processors may not dismiss a privately completed DBQ without a justifiable and documented reason. So here is your higher level review. Here's the manual reference for 413A1F that you fight them. You guys didn't fill out. Like, how did you deem my claim to be insufficient? What was the justifiable and documented reason why my claim was insufficient? And it can't just be fraud, right? If a claims processor determines that a private DBQ is potentially inauthentic, right, which is subjective, and the VA examination is needed, then the claims processor must add a permanent note. Must. Now, in the M21 manual, okay, when it comes to the words that are chosen, okay, and how you win or how you lose things, okay, now this is me stomping my foot on the ground for this will be on the test at the end of this session. If they use the words must and they do not do it, then that is a problem. Like that is a clear and unmistakable error, because there is no wiggle room for that. And let me move that stupid thing. They must add a permanent VBMS note stating the reason why it was inauthentic. If they do not, they cannot go back in time and add that note. So your thing is not inauthentic if it can be applied. Like, there are situations where it is inauthentic, right? Like somebody forged a signature, let's say. It doesn't even look anything like the signature, but they didn't do the note. The evidence itself, if it is authentic, will not hold up on a higher level review if it is truly authentic. But what I am specifically talking about is, I am specifically talking about the instances where they just toss and burn your private DBQs because they just want to gatekeep you from getting the, what you deserve, what the evidence shows that is represented and should be evaluated, right? So this right here, they must do that. That is also grounds on your higher level review to say, hey, look, I went to my VSO. I don't see a permanent VBMS note or a note on the document itself. I don't see any kind of documentation showing why it is inauthentic, right? So, and then we come down here to the potential indicators of inauthenticity. So, while privately completed DBQ should be generally accepted at face value, there are some considerations. There may be factors that warrant a closer scrutiny, right? But some people have that turned on 100% of the time. And I don't understand it. It just drives me nuts. Indicators of potential inauthenticity include, but are not limited to. So are not limited to means anything's on the table when it comes to how we interpret the M21 manual. If you tell me not limited to, then you don't give me a boundary. So I can just say, he's wearing a yellow shirt that day. Some people that if they're looking for something, they'll find it. And I'm on the other side of it where unless I see something glaring, I take it at face value. And that's the way I think every single person that rates a claim should. As the rater, you're the last line of defense when it comes to evaluating evidence, and you should take it at face value. If it becomes fraudulent, that'll come out in the wash later on, right? But for you, your job as a rater is to actually just review and see, hey, legally, does it check the boxes? And if it does, you should do it, and you shouldn't invoke powers erroneously to, basically get one over on somebody that you think is being a fraud person. So, the non-VA provider identified on the DBQ has contact information that is unverifiable or contains discrepancies. This is potentially, by the way, but they're treating it like this is an absolute. I'm getting a little heated, so I'll just try to center myself and get back to it. So, when your contact information isn't lining up for the examiner, so this is their NPI number, this is the number that they write on the the DBQ itself. This is all the information that we said in the first video. Like, these are all the things that the private provider needs to list. If those things are not matching up across, like if I call, like if you say you work at Johnson's Healthcare Center and the number you gave says, Mary's Healthcare Center, that's a discrepancy they can use to toss your thing. If, the MPI number says something different, like the examiner hasn't updated the NPI registry in a while, you can have 2 out of the 3 things to where you can call that number that's listed on the DBQ and it matches up with the with all the information that's on the DBQ matches up. But if the NPI information is different, right? Like they haven't updated it in 2 years, the VSR and or rater can use that to inauthenticate your DBQ. Wow, right? Not based upon the evidence, not based upon the validity of the thing that's being articulated in the DBQ. No. Just based upon a clerical issue. So you have to double check your private DBQs. And if you can't do it, you need somebody else to do it. You need to make sure that everything is dress right dress for all the requirements of the examiner that was listed in part 1 of this video. Is located an unreasonable distance away from the home of record. Yet the provider reported regularly seeing the veteran. Okay, so this is where, and I'm getting heated again, I'm sorry. This is where they stopped reading. Okay, so the VSR, the QRT, all the people stopped reading here. They stopped reading right here. And they said, 100 miles away, fraud. But if you keep reading, it says that, where the examiner makes statements that are unrepresented by the facts. Like, okay, I see this person on a regular basis, right? I had somebody, I'm just going to go off on a tangent here. I had somebody that they would see somebody over 100 miles away, or a state away. Well, what happened was I found out that the person was a long-haul truck driver, and they had a routine route, and they would stay a couple days over at the place. And so they got care over there for their condition. So they had 2 different providers in 2 different locations that talked to each other. Well, the provider that was at the end of the route was the one that actually filled out the DBQ. Right? So over 100 miles away, a couple states away, they received this care because it was such a common route for them that they, would go over there and stay a couple days, and, they would just have their care over there. I reinstated the DBQ because it made sense. But this is why whenever you submit a private DBQ, you have to tell them why you do it. You have to explain things, or else they're going to toss your stuff. This is not clickbait. Okay, this is not me trying to scare you into anything. This is me trying to explain to you that there are a lot of my peers that have anger about private DBQs. Like, they think that it is the worst thing they've ever seen, and I don't understand it. I don't know why they do this, but they do it. And there are so many testimonials. You can look in the comments section on these videos. So-and-so tossed my private DBQ. Yeah, they did. But the best thing that we can do is we can arm you with the information to hopefully make it to where they don't want to toss your DBQ. And if they do, the evidence such as this that you can use to appeal it and say, look, my private DBQ is squared away unless you tell me it wasn't. And then you have to tell me, right? This is why I talked about the long form narratives beforehand. Like, all my videos are kind of leading up to this stuff that you want to ask them on the VA Form 21-4138, Statement in Support of Claim, hey, can you please do a long form narrative for me? I want to know why you did the things that you did, because they won't tell you on a short form. But anyway, okay, so privately completed DBQ contains information that conflicts with the overall evidentiary record. Okay, now this is fair. Like, this is a fair critique of the DBQ. If you tell me you can't walk and then in some other records you're doing a marathon, that needs to be ran down. I need to figure that one out. Like, what happened? Like science or religion. I don't know which one happened, but something happened to where you can magically walk again. Or you're walking on Tuesdays through Fridays, and then on Saturdays you're not walking. Like, is there a medical rationale behind it, actually? Because you could have IVDS, intravertebral disc syndrome, where, like you have these bed rest type situations. Fair enough. Like, but the evidence has to show why, right? Like, we have to explain things through evidence. Signs of improper alteration. Fair enough. Do not like fraud, genuine fraud, but the improper alteration is not a good thing. And then VA determines that the privately completed DBQ is insufficient for rating purposes and orders an examination, but the veteran refuses to report to the examination. So this right here, actually, hold on, ding, 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 ding. This is probably the most important thing I need to tell you guys. If you do not show up to the examination after they have deemed it to be insufficient and they send you for an examination and you do not go to that examination, they will consider everything coming from you as inauthentic moving forward. They will consider that will have sealed all the nails in the coffin for you tried to do fraud. That's what this will say. If you do not go to that exam, if you're like, whatever, I don't care. And then every subsequent DBQ after that can become tainted. Right here. I mean, this part right here, like that's not necessarily what it says, right? It says VA determines the privately completed DBQ is insufficient for rating purposes, but the veteran refused to go to the exam. And then you just have to walk back up here and see what it says. Indicators of potential inauthenticity. So if you're inauthentic, then everything you've done is inauthentic. Everything that it attacks your credibility. So I have no clue why this is here, but this is a credibility killer. Okay? That's not me hyping it up. That's not anything. That's them. And I would go to the VSO. Like, if you've ever done this right here, if you have ever done this thing right here where you submitted a private DBQ and you did not attend the subsequent exam, you just said, no, just run my DBQ, then do me a favor and go to the VSO and have them around that time period look at all of the VBMS notes that are in your claim. Okay, around that time. Because what I want to make sure is if they actually wrote a note saying that, hey, this is inauthentic so-and-so. Because I would want that to be stricken from my VBMS if possible. Typically, you can't strike it, but I would want them to put in a new note in my chart saying, there is no inauthenticity here. Because that can taint or produce bias in the next person that touches your claim. You do an appeal on this claim. They look back. There's a note in there that says inauthentic, right? Then guess what? The person reviewing for whether or not you have new and relevant evidence is going to see that, and they're going to be biased against anything that you submit, potentially. It depends on the individual and their ability to be biased. But if they're following this manual reference, right, then they are seeing that you submitted inauthentic stuff. So there's a conclusion that can be drawn from this, okay? And I am currently at 38 minutes, so there might have to be a part 3 for this. But important, in the presence of one or more of these potential indicators of inauthenticity do not automatically mean that a private DBQ is inauthentic or fraudulent. Once again, this is for your higher level review. You need to submit this, like this. These manual references that I've given you for this need to be in there for your higher level reviews if this happens to you. But see, they don't read this stuff. There is selective comprehension on the manual references by the majority of VSRs and raters. I mean, as evidenced by how many times you guys say that DBQs aren't accepted. By how many times people on my team say, "Nah, I mean, what's your ratio?" I've got about a 1 to 6 ratio of them going through. For me, it's much higher because I was in the medical field. I was in the mental health field. I have a background to see kind of, okay, that kind of matches up, that lines up. But, not everybody has that. So, and I reach out. Some VSRs and raters say that they reached out to the examiner, but they don't. And that's an integrity thing on them, but I know that they don't because, you did this rating at 6 o'clock in the morning. I can tell when you did the rating. So you called that examiner who it would have been 4 a.m. their time. You called them. You did that. You called them at 4 a.m. and that's a genuine, honest attempt to get this clarified, or you didn't do the math on when the dates and times were, and on the when that examiner, where that examiner is or lives and where you live, and you didn't do that math. Okay. Sorry, that's me ranting again. Okay, we're trying to get out of here before 40 minutes and too late. Okay. So the distance between the person and the provider, like it shouldn't be like should not be considered an indicator of potential inauthenticity, but they do it all the time. So this is why you need to arm yourselves with these things that say, hey, look, you can't just take that at face value. You've got to, the rater, have the burden of proof to show how this is excessive. It shouldn't on its face disqualify. How was whatever it was excessive? A private completed DBQ should not be routinely rejected or automatically deemed potentially inauthentic or fraudulent solely because it supports entitlement to the maximum scheduler. Once again, these are statements to prevent against bias. Like, the bias is there. Like, these are the guardrails that the VSRs and the raters should be following right here, but they're not reading it. They're doing these things. Claim processors have a duty to evaluate the weight of all evidence. I mean, this is what we should be doing. But anyway, that's about all I got for you today. It's a 40-minute video. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry that I've rambled in it. I will probably do a part 3, or I will do these DBQs in a different video for, like, maybe not titled Sufficiency for Private DBQs, but I will do them separately. Okay, that's about all I got for you guys today. Thank you, and Raider out.